Hey everybody, it's Adam again and welcome back to my garage. Today I am super stoked because we are going to start laying the groundwork for Project E36 XTI, namely with the Transfercase, which is an ATC300 out of an E93 series. So what's special about these transfer cases is they have a little electrical actuator that engages the clutch plates to distribute torque between the front and rear wheels. And what's special about it though is BMW is pretty tight-lipped about how their actuator controller works. So we got to dig into how this actuator works, and then we're going to work on, in a later episode, how we're going to control that with a PIC controller and other sensors. Come along for the ride. So if you saw the first episode introducing the project on the E36, it's no secret that I was modeling it after my 2004 STI and some of the cool things you can do with the drivetrain on this being all-wheel drive. Let's go ahead and sit inside the car and I'll demonstrate how the driver control center diff works on the Subaru and what we want to accomplish with the E36. Basically, on my 2004 GDB STI, you've got what you call a driver controlled center diff, or DCCD. There you can see it's an auto mode. When you turn it on by default, basically the BCM and the ECU in the vehicle are controlling the slip between the front and the rear wheels via an electronic transfer case. And we'll get a little more detail into how the Subaru is different from the BMW, but in actuality, this is what I want to get at in the BMW project. So it starts out in auto mode there. And if you hit a selector button down here, you can go into manual. Right now, it's got the full unlock, basically. The green indicator down at the bottom indicates that the center diff is fully unlocked, and really you're relying on a mechanical limited slip that's in the center differential to bias between the front and rear wheels, but it effectively allows the front and rear wheels to be somewhat independent in how they're operating, biasing most of the torque to the rear, especially when you're going around turns and getting on the gas. So as you index the thumb wheel forward, you can see it goes all the way up to a lock position, and that basically is locking your rear and fronts together, and the only thing it's going through is the 38 front, 62 rear mechanical limited slip that's also in the differential, and effectively locks your front wheels to your rear wheels, and basically it's like a four-wheel drive vehicle at that point, where if you try to do a turn in a parking lot and it's dry, you'll feel the drivetrain bind up, you'll hear the tires squeak, you'll feel the front lurch on you and so forth. So really you use that for basically extreme driving in snow and gravel and rain type situations. Actually, if you go back in the history of my videos, you can see where I took the Subaru through a pretty substantial snowstorm one time, locked the diff, and it soldiered through like a tank. So ultimately what we want to get at with the BMW is I want a similar sort of control with a manual mode, basically to say, okay, well, we'll leave the center diff unlocked, and on the BMW, we'll get into some details as to what's different between the BMW and the Subaru, but basically, I want to have an automatic mode where it applies torque to the front wheels based off of throttle position and things like that, and then I want to be able to put it into a manual mode as well, so I can adjust the slip between the front and the rear wheels as far as the center diff goes. Probably not going to be as refined as what we've got here in the Subaru, at least at first, but it is something to start that we're going to be able to at least lock the diff if we want to get a full four-wheel drive on the E36 if we find ourselves in a hairy situation off-road somewhere. Let's go take a look at some of the differences between the Subaru system and what we're going to put in the E36. Okay, we're going to geek out on some technical stuff here, so if you want to see me wrenching, go ahead and fast forward, take a look at the chapters down below, and you'll see where we start to tear into the transfer case and look at how it actuates. So let's talk a little bit more about how this Subaru center diff works, and then we'll get into the ATC300 mechanization. Right here we've got a diagram, basically of the torque biasing clutches on the Subaru between the front and rear wheels. As I mentioned, you've got this planetary gear unit and a mechanical limited slip unit in there. And basically this planetary gear unit on the 2004 is a 38 front and 62 rear torque biasing. Effectively, that's always the bias that you've got between the front and rear wheels. Then you've got this mechanical limited slip in there, so if you're fully locked up, you do have a little bit of a mechanical limited slip. And then basically, you've got this electrical limited slip diff here, which is controlled by that knob I was showing earlier. So effectively, when you turn that knob all the way forward, it's engaging these clutches 100% and basically squishing them together to the point of where you've got a full mechanical lock between your electrical limited slip and then that mechanical LSD into the planetary gears here. As you loosen it up, if you go all the way back, this solenoid effectively here, this big old coil, loosens up on there, and this clutch disengages here. And effectively it allows all the slip in between there really to only rely on this mechanical limited slip in the planetary gear. One of the fundamental differences between the BMW system and the Subaru system is how these clutches here and this electrical limited slip are controlled. So we'll go to the next page here. This is what the Subaru DCCD clutch looks like. And basically it's contained into one cylindrical unit. You've got two wires coming in here. When you turn that knob up and down, effectively it's a pulse width modulation signal that increases the intensity of the electromagnetic coil in this clutch. As you increase that intensity, it wants to pull the clutch plates together and really bind them together. As you decrease it, it loosens it up and allows a lot of slip in between each of the clutch plates in here. Now let's look at the BMW setup. So in our ATC300 differential, that's what we have down there in that E90 transmission and transfer case. Instead of having a coil that basically sandwiches those clutch plates together, you've got more of a mechanical system here that effectively pushes or pulls, I would even say screws, two different wings together and apart. And basically what that does is that engages your clutches by effectively scissoring. It wants to screw the clutches in together and relieve them back and forth. So when you spread them out apart completely, that's when you've got that full engagement, just like you've got full power on the DCCD. And then when you relax that, it allows the clutches in here to basically loosen up, and then that disconnects the front and rear wheels. One of the main differences here on the BMW transfer case is you don't see a mechanical limited slip or other helical gears up in here. So you can truly achieve 100% rear wheel drive with this by disengaging this clutch. In fact, a lot of things that I've seen online, and about the only thing I've seen online for these transfer cases, is if people are having problems with these actuators down here. This is the little electrical actuator that controls how much squeeze you get on that clutch. They simply disconnect this and they get a full rear bias, full 100% rear on the BMW. So for all the people who are hating on me for wanting to do all-wheel drive in an E36, I can still go 100% rear-wheel drive by disengaging this clutch in here, and that's exactly what we're setting out to do with this electronic module. So what we want to do with this electronic module is figure out how can we control this little electric motor down here to give me infinite variability between a full lockup to get 50 front, 50 rear, 50%, and to fully disengage it to get full rear whenever I feel like it. So what we want to do today, and this is where we're going to get really technical with this, is dig into that little electrical actuator down here, figure out how that thing works, and create a little control module to help us control that however I want while I'm driving the car in whatever condition we're driving. Oh, and by the way, I think my seal down here is leaking. I saw it earlier, so we're probably going to end up having to pull this little stub shaft out of here and replace that seal. But basically today, we're going to take a look at how this little electric motor ticks. And then in a future episode, we're going to go ahead and program our own microcontroller to control this actuator based off of switch inputs and then maybe some throttle inputs or other inputs coming from the ECU to adjust the front rear bias as we're going through different type of maneuvers and throttle maps. Now, one thing worth mentioning is the Subarus are pretty popular in the rally scene. So there's a lot of aftermarket availability out there for DCCD controllers that allow you to look at like yaw, accelerometer, those types of things, and basically adjust the front rear bias depending on what the vehicle sees there. On the BMW side, after exhaustive search over the last couple of months, I have not been able to find any sort of aftermarket support for tuning the center diff controller on these E90 transmissions. And that's why we're setting out here to do our own controller for that. So we got to figure out how that actuator works in order to get this thing to work, and then we'll see how this performs when we get out on the trails. Let's go ahead and get that center diff disassembled from the transmission, shall we? Oops, didn't want to take that guy out. Man, these things are a lot easier to work on when they're out of the car, because if this was in the car, it would probably be almost impossible to get at these top bolts. And I don't have a lift. So should I get a new garage somewhere someday so I can at least put a 8-foot lift in there? I've only got 9-foot ceilings in here, and it is getting more and more difficult to roll around on my back to do work. And if you saw my Sonoma in the background, it's taken me a good 3 months to get that taken care of. All right, there we go. And we are now separated here. I'm tired of looking at this bracket down here, transmission cross member here, so we're going to go ahead and remove that before we put this up on the bench. Now, goodness gracious. So we got this little metal bracket on the bottom here. Looks like I'm gonna have to take those off too. And there we go. Now, because it's super critical, this project's going to take us a little while that we keep an eye on these bolts. Typically you want to bag them up, but I'm just going to throw them into this bucket for now, and hopefully we'll find the right ones when we go ahead and put this thing back together later. Let's get this actuator pulled off of here, and we'll start taking a look at the pinout on this thing to figure out what these circuits do. So this guy on the outside is a little 2-pin connector here. I think all it really is just an identifier, like a resistor, basically identifying the motor you got on here. So if someone were to replace this motor, basically when you plug this in, the computer sees it in the vehicle, in the BMW itself, and it knows that you've put a different actuator on there if you pull this guy off of here. I think it's just an identifier. I don't know if I can pull that off of there. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull the motor off of here. We'll take a look down in there. So actually, before we pull the motor off of here, I want to show you something. So about the only thing useful that I could find online about these transfer cases is that when you unplug this connector down here, you unplug this connector, that one right there, and I was lucky enough to get this off the donor car. Basically, when you unplug this, it goes into the default state of this transfer case. The default state, from what I can see, is you've got 100% connection all the time between where the guibo mounts up over here and the output shaft of the transmission. And then down here, you can see as I turn the output shaft here from the transmission, I'm able to hold on to the output shaft that goes to the front of the car, to the front differential, and there really isn't much resistance here. There's a little bit of resistance there, but not much. So right now, I would say this diff is really in the open state, and that's kind of what we expected. So we're going to go ahead and pull this motor off of here and figure out what makes this guy tick. All right, come on there. Okay, so there is our little actuator there. You can see this gear on the outside here. And one of the things that I couldn't really figure out reading up on this online is if you disconnect this actuator, how does this guy go to an automatic open diff sort of position? And the spring back on the clutch in here has got to be enough to override this. Let's say this guy failed in a position where the transfer case was locked up. I got to believe that it can back drive to get to this point again where the clutches are disengaged. But turning like by hand on this actuator here, I can't get any motion out of that. So I have to believe when you shut the vehicle off, a regular xDrive vehicle, this actuator automatically goes back to a home position. So let's take a look down in the hole here where that actuator came out of. You can see there are teeth up inside here that this little sprocket on the end of here interface with, and it turns that back and forth there. Now there's a cam there, and these are part of that sort of scissor mechanism I was talking about earlier, where basically it's pushing the legs of the scissor in and out so you actuate the clutch here. So those right there, that's what we're seeing right down inside of there. There's little ball bearings on the end of there. And the motor that we pulled out, there's our sprocket down on there. And basically that's actuating this little hurricane symbol looking thing here. And it widens and closes those legs in and out. Let's get this transfer case out of the way and then dig into this little actuator to see how this thing works inside. Okay, so we've got 4 screws on the back side of this here. Looks like those are Torx head. We're going to go ahead and peel those off of there. We're going to pull the motor apart here, separate it. There's also a little worm gear inside here. One of the areas that I've seen online at least that are prone to damage on this thing are the plastic gear inside there, and that worm will strip out. This feels pretty good here. There's a little bit of lash there, but that doesn't feel too bad. Let's go ahead and pull this motor off here. There we go. Look at that. Oh boy. Oh, I don't like... Yeah. Okay, so basically I'm taking the motor apart here as opposed to taking the motor off of there, which I thought this whole thing would pull off, but no. So effectively you've got your rotor and your windings out here, and basically you've got your magnets on the outside of there, just like any other DC motor. And just as I expected, this truly is a DC motor in here. There doesn't seem to be really anything too special in there in terms of how this motor is set up. It just looks like a regular DC motor. That really is a good thing for how we want to control this thing later on. I don't see any position feedback or anything. Now there may be something going on back here where you've got some Hall sensors or some other position feedback underneath here. We're going to take a look at that once we get that off. But at the end of the day, this just looks like a DC motor. And the good news for us is when you PWM that, provided there's enough resistance on the sprocket down here as you're PWMing it, we'll be able to control exactly where that clutch lines up as it's resisting, you know, the push basically to open or shut the clutch plates. Let's figure out how to get this guy off. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so we're going to pull that right out of there. There we go. So on the end of here, we got this little worm gear there. You can see that. So basically what that guy's doing is it's turning the gear up inside here. It's kind of hard to see it, and you don't have good light there. But basically, there's the plastic helical gear up inside there, and we're going to inspect those threads, kind of turn it around here, and that actually looks pretty good. Moves nice and free there, feels pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to reassemble this guy here. Oh geez, yeah, you know, and something else to keep in mind. Notice it has this observe precautions for handling the electrostatic sensitive devices. That's not important for what we're doing here. I don't care. If we blow this thing up, it is what it is. We'll get another one. But we're not grounding ourselves or anything when we're working on the bench here. It is what it is. But ultimately, it seems like for having 7 terminals coming out of this thing, there's got to be something special going on down inside of here. So we're going to remove these 2 screws here, and hopefully we can get this guy torn apart. We'll see if there's a little motor sensor board or something up inside there that's really super special for how this guy's put together. Yeah, we just get, there we go. Okay. Well, you know what? Kind of looks like this little worm gear here and this bearing are pressed on there, and I don't know if we're really going to be able to get this guy out of here without a press. So I think what we're going to do, we're just going to assemble this guy back together, and basically we'll take a look at the pinout of this connector and figure out what we got to do to make this motor run. She really is pretty smooth there, and the brushes on here got a lot of life left on them. So I think this motor is good to go for another probably, I don't know, 550,000 miles or something like that. But basically we'll put her back together there. There we go. So I know, you know, you don't want to forget these other O-rings and so forth that are supposed to go on there. Looks like she goes on just like that. And there's a little keyway up on the top of here. There's a little nub that sticks out the top of there. And basically you just put it back together like that. Okay, so this motor is spinning nice and free now. I think what we're going to do, we're going to put this whole thing back together here. There we go. All right, she's back on there. And we're going to go ahead and reassemble our little actuator back together here. And we're just going to basically leave it in this state here while we do our experiments with the PWM to see what makes this little guy tick. All right, she's back together here. All right, I'm going to have to go online to see if I can find a pinout for this connector. But basically, this is our connector that goes onto the end of the motor. Now that we've got her back together, just for the heck of it, I'm going to go ahead and power the brown wire here, which BMW's very typically brown is ground. And then the other high current wire, or the thicker gauge wire here, I have to believe is our positive terminal. We're just going to go ahead and put a 9-volt battery across this and see if our motor actuates here. So then we're going to do that. And then this here. There we go, look at that. So we got the motor actuating here right now, which is a good sign. That motor seems to be strong. Really no weird noises or anything like that. Now, mind you, this is only 9 volts going through here. We have 12 volts, she'll probably be spinning a lot faster. But really seems to be operating fine here. And we're going to dig into a little bit more what these other terminals are doing on this connector here. So I did a little bit of thinking and a little bit of drawing on this little diagram here. Found this guy online. And basically what this is it's a wiring diagram for the Transfercase actuator. You've got different circuits on here. We'll show a picture of that as we go through each of these things. But basically, we're going to work on reverse engineering how this actuator works and all the different sensor signals that come out of it. This is where we're going to really geek out about how this little actuator works here. And what I have here is the connector. This comes from the ECU that controls the Transfercase actuator. So we're going to say we started out high, and we got 1 pulse low. They're all different colors than what I'm able to find online for anything with this actuator.